Greetings, my friends. Joey the Watchman here with another update in regards to the situations of wars and rumors of wars and nations rising against nations globally. And this video here will specifically focus on the Middle Eastern region and some of the things transpiring in those locations. And we're going to talk about Syria, Israel, Egypt. Russia's involvement of it all. Talk a little bit about some prophecies in the book of Isaiah, as well as many other prophecies, specifically regarding some of these places that we're going to be talking about and looking at some articles on. So we'll just get right to it. And this first piece I want to bring up just briefly here is a piece from the Jerusalem Post. And it's Obama, the President of the United States of America, congratulating Benjamin Netanyahu for winning by a very narrow margin, I might add, the Prime Minister role over there in Israel. So his tenure continues. And it says here, U.S. President tells Netanyahu that he looks forward to working closely with a new government. And we see that, if you remember, I had shown you the, I think it's H.R. 4133, and I'm just going to pull that that legislation up here for a second. That basically states that the United States of America is tied legally and basically binded to the whatever the war agenda may be of Israel. And so I just wanted to show this to you, and this is from the GOP.gov website. And when we look at the bill here, it's H.R. 4133 from the 112th Congress in the second session. And we see that it's called the United States-Israel Enhanced Security Cooperation Act of 2012. And the date this was actually signed was May 9th, 2012, if you remember back when I did the videos on that on my old channel. And it goes on to talk about, as we see here in the executive summary, H.R. 4133 would state that it is U.S. policy to reaffirm the commitment to Israel's security as a Jewish state, provide Israel with military capabilities to defend itself by itself against any threats, veto any one-sided anti-Israel resolution at the United Nations Security Council, support Israel's inherent right to self-defense, expand military and civilian cooperation, assist in a negotiated settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that results in two states living side by side in peace and security, and to encourage Israel's neighbors to recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. But it goes on to give you some of the points here. The bill would also state that the United States should take the following actions to assist in the defense of Israel. And we see some of the things here, which basically is to make a long story short, give them whatever they need for whatever agenda they desire to pursue. It says here that Number 1, provide Israel such support as may be necessary to increase development and production of joint missile defense systems, particularly such systems that defend the urgent threat posed to Israel and the United States forces in the region. And we had seen that when they had given them millions of dollars to the Iron Dome missile defense over there. And if you remember, I had reported on that. But again, it goes on to talk about more. I'm not going to get into the entire legislation here, but I'll go ahead and link you guys up to it. And that way there, if you want to verify it for yourself, you can go have a look at it. But we got a lot to get to, so I just want to kind of get rolling here. And if you remember late last year, towards the end of the year in 2012, that just ended recently, we had seen that whole conflict spiraling out of control between Israel and Gaza. And we had actually seen, as this piece alludes to here, from globalresearch.ca, that Israel went ahead and they called up 75,000 troops as this bombing was going on in Gaza, and they were firing rockets at one another, and there was airstrikes going on. If you remember, I had covered that situation in depth when it was occurring. So we had that whole situation. But getting back to the Israeli topic just for a second here, I had shown you that, obviously the United States is backing Israel with whatever they need, and Canada is basically in the same boat. And we had seen that as Canada's defense minister had strong words about the two conflicts in the Middle East. And this was at the security summit that was held back in November. And Peter MacKay actually said that Israel has a right to defend itself against Hamas, and that Russia should step into the deteriorating situation in Syria. And we know about Russia's increasing role over there in the Middle East, and we're going to talk a lot about that as we come along. And we know that they're, as the scriptures tell us, they're involved in the battle of Gog and Magog, and that's talked about even in the book of Ezekiel as the nations gather to go against Israel. And even it's not just the Canada's defense minister. We had Prime Minister Stephen Harper. The Prime Minister of Canada came out and said that he was prepared to, and this is his exact words, he was prepared to suffer any political backlash that comes his way for speaking out against anti-Israeli rhetoric. And he actually told an audience that Canada is obligated to stand up for its ally in Israel when it comes under attack from others. He says, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because history shows us, and the ideology of the anti-Israel mob tells us all too well, that those who threaten the existence of the Jewish people are, in the longer term, a threat to all of us. And he then goes on to say that, he said, but as long as I am Prime Minister, whether it is at the United Nations, the Francophonie, or anywhere else, Canada will take that stand with Israel, whatever the cost. And so, moving on, we see that once again, Russia, Iran, and China standing together as allies, as we had seen over the past 2 years that I've been covering all this stuff going on over there. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in some of the articles that I've got to show you as we move along here in the video. But if you remember, Russia and China both boycotted the Friends of Syria summit. They've been, very vocal publicly about their opposition to, NATO and just the Western-backed agenda that's been going on, not only in Africa but especially in the Middle East, and have spoken out against it. China has come out and stated that, and I had reported on this on several occasions in the past, that any attack on Iran would be considered a direct attack on Beijing. So that draws China into the matter, right? And Russia has come out and obviously sided with Iran and Syria, and they're already at odds with the United States. And we got a lot of pieces talking about that and all of the agreements that have been nixed by the two nations as as their relations continue to intensify in what's very similar to Cold War rhetoric that we had seen previously. But Russia has come out and said that they were against the European missile defense system that was being installed because the U.S. wouldn't confirm that it was actually against Russia. They just said, oh no, trust us, it's not against you, and so forth. And Russia came out and publicly stated that they reserved their right for a preemptive strike on the facility if they went ahead and erected it. And we see that they are going ahead and doing this. And not only are they putting missile defense systems there, they're putting them on the other side of China in the South Asia Sea. We know about that conflict down there in the Asia Pacific and the South China Sea, between all those nations, and North Korea, doing nuclear testing and all these things, are all very symbolic of the biblical times in which we live, as I always say. And this is just another article here showing the unity between some of these nations, specifically Russia, Iran, and China, and they condemned Israel's attack on Gaza when that was all going on. And they've condemned them for many things recently, but this is just another example of them standing in unity against some of the Israeli and Western-backed agendas over there in that region. And we had also seen the Iranian president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, came out and stating that the Tel Aviv regime actually staged this war against the besieged Gaza Strip in order to secure its survival, and that's according to Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran. There were also these reports released by the Sudan Tribune talking about how Hamas and Sudan vowed mutual support against Israel. And so we see slowly the makings of this battle of Gog and Magog situation coming to fruition right before our eyes, and we're going to see more evidence of this as we move along here. Even Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi has warned that the ongoing airstrikes that were going on whenever they were, Israel and Gaza were feuding, that the Israeli regime blockaded the Gaza Strip and it will jeopardize security in the region. And we're going to talk a lot more about Morsi and the Egyptian situation and the fulfillment of the Isaiah 19 prophecy a little bit later in the video. But for now, I just want to kind of focus on the Syria-Israel perspective of things. Even the Libyan parliament was getting involved in regards to that Gaza conflict, as many nations were. I'm sure there's obviously several situations that I'm obviously not even going to include in here. I'm just kind of going through the more relevant ones, if you will. But Libya's General National Congress actually decided that they were going to send a delegation to the Gaza Strip when this was all going on to express their solidarity with the Palestinians amid this that wave of violence that was going on with the Israeli and Gaza airstrikes over there near the coastal enclave. And before now that I mentioned Libya, I just wanted to throw in that we talked a lot about different prophecies and so forth, and I also talked about the Daniel 11:41 through 45 prophecy, where it talks about many nations being overthrown in the Middle East as the Antichrist spirit sweeps through the Middle East, and many nations were to be overthrown. And they actually mentioned Egypt, Libya, and at the steps of Ethiopia. But it also mentions that Jordan will not fall. And that's what we had seen among other nations, Tunisia, Yemen, and so forth. But we had seen uprisings occur that actually forced the regime to topple, and a new puppet dictator was put into place. And every single time it was someone from the Muslim Brotherhood or the Islamic jihadists that were brought into power every time over there. And that's what we had seen with Morsi in Egypt even, and some of the things he did, right? And we're going to talk more about that after. But he basically fired all the military commanders and the defense chiefs and put all his own people in control over there. And they were even reluctant to give him the powers at first. If you remember me reporting on that, they didn't even grant him full presidential powers even when he won the election. But now he's found ways around it, and through executive orders and restructuring everything, that he now has this power. And we'll see what comes of it. But we talk about the Isaiah 19 prophecy of the Lord handing over the Egyptians to a cruel ruler, and that how the streets would be filled with riots, and Egyptians would be fighting against Egyptians in the streets. And look what we see over there now. We're going to cover that in depth towards the end of the video after we get through the stuff on Israel. But again, it's very very symbolic of these biblical times, and we see many prophecies in the progress of potential fulfillment in the coming days, months, and weeks, depending on how much these events accelerate. I'm not going to say it's fulfilled now, because it's not. But if you're paying attention to what's going on, we're certainly progressing towards fulfillment, and that's a very real truth. And of course, we had this piece. This was I've got this pulled up here on the Jerusalem Post, but it talks about how the PLO Executive Committee member Hanan Ashrawi came out and stated that he wanted the European Union to hold Israel accountable for the violence that was going on over there between Gaza and Israel. So we see again, the European Union, which is basically the Roman Empire up there, after they migrated up there, formed the 10 divisions of Rome after the great battle back in the day. And so again, we see more of the major nations of the world becoming involved in this conflict, as we see and we'll see as we go along here, some of the warships all in the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean and so forth, all surrounding. Right now we're already seeing a lot of major nations surrounding the Middle East, and specifically Israel and Syria and all of that. And we talk about Syria, you think about the Isaiah 17 and the prophecy of the destruction of Damascus, which is pretty near literal fulfillment if you understand what's going on over there. Civil war for some time now, and more nations being involved in that conflict, which is obviously going to spill over into Iran and involve Israel. And then obviously we talked about how that pulls in China and Russia, and NATO's already involved, and then the United Nations, and you could see how it just trickle-down effect globally, and next thing you know, we're into, the Battle of Armageddon and a World War III type scenario. Still on the Jerusalem Post here, this was a piece that originally was reported by Reuters, but we had seen that it's carried here in the Jerusalem Post as well. But again, when all this was going on with Israel and Gaza and that, we seen Russia was very vocal, and this is just another report of them coming out calling for an end to the Israel and Palestinian strikes that were going on. And even in this piece here from CNN News, we had seen that, and this was reported on November the 19th, that when all this stuff was going on over there, the United States actually sent warships near and posted them near Israel in case evacuation was needed, and actually literal aircraft carriers. And this isn't the only one over there, but we'll see how much this has escalated as we move on here. But again, we see warships being put into the area. Even the Jordanian King Abdullah II, came out and said that the two-state solution would only be viable while Obama is still in office. And this was actually just reported recently on January the 25th. And I mean, folks, this could be very, very prophetic here, because I mean, we know that the Antichrist figure that arises actually makes a 7-year peace treaty with Israel. He breaks the treaty 3 years into it and basically declares himself to be God, and we know what the scriptures tell us about that, and the people will worship him. It will come in the name of peace and safety and so forth, but there won't be peace and safety. This piece here talks about how, as we see here, and personally, I don't believe that Obama is the Antichrist. I mean, that remains to be seen. But I'll be doing a video on that in time to come as I look deeper into it. But it says here that, and this is a quote from King Abdullah, as it says, "The time to take action in the Middle East is now." And that was his resounding message of King Abdullah II's speech to the World Economic Forum in Davos on Friday. If we're not too late, the two-state solution will only last as long as Obama's term, he warned. If it doesn't happen by then, I don't think it will happen. The Palestinians must be granted their rights to their own future, Abdullah said, as he called upon the international community to end this conflict once and for all. So, I mean, we see that they're calling upon this peace treaty now that the scriptures talk about, and we'll see what happens if he ends up signing a 7-year peace treaty between the two sides. That'll be, that'll be pretty eerie situation if you're familiar with the prophecies and what the scriptures tell us about that. But definitely a relevant piece I wanted to include for you guys, and it'll be linked below with everything I've shown you. There was even this situation, which had the United Nations Human Rights Council reviewing, the violations, apparently, of Israel's actions against the Palestinians' rights, and Tel Aviv, or Israel, actually boycotted this meeting. So we just see the friction and the tensions ever so present here. And then we had on the 25th of January, so just about a week or so ago, we had this piece come out from the Jerusalem Post talking about how Iran would definitely use nuclear weapon on Israel. And this former Iranian diplomat's comments are from what he told Channel 2, and he said that Tehran will have the know-how to make a bomb in a year. And he added that Venezuela provides Iran with uranium. And if you've been watching my videos, I had reported recently that President Ahmadinejad was down in Venezuela, solidifying his ties with the Venezuelan government, and standing in solidarity with them. And I had showed you that in recent reports. And meanwhile, recently we have been seeing many nations, but specifically here Iran, unveiling new technologies and capabilities in terms of military, and missile defense systems and different planes and so forth. And we'll see a few articles on this as we move along. But this one had Iranian armed forces claiming that the country's latest achievements were missile technology, and that is very much more advanced than the world believes that they are capable of. And in other news, we had seen that an Iranian lawmaker actually came out and said that the Israeli regime would be the main loser of close ties and unity between Iran and Egypt, and is hatching plots to prevent these two important countries from coming together in unity. And it mentions that, as we see here, Western governments are plotting against Muslim countries to undermine their unity and fan the flames of conflict and differences among them, a member of Iran's Majlis, or Government National Security and Foreign Policy Committee, Maham Hassan Asafari, said on Monday. And this was January 28th, 2013, that this came out. So we see all these countries that are spoken of to be a part of the Battle of Gog and Magog starting to come together slowly. All the nations are starting to surround Israel and the Middle Eastern areas like Syria and whatnot. That's not even to take into account what's going on in Africa. And we'll update in a different video later on that specific situation, which is also just as unstable as what's going on in the Middle East. Although the Middle East, has very prophetic implications that the Bible clearly tells us about in these exact nations, and it's all coming to pass in the exact nations with yet more accuracy and prophetic fulfillments from the divinely inspired Word of God that cannot be denied. And this is what we see is much more military drills going on in these specific areas, as in this case here, the Islamic Revolution Guard Corps Navy has started a 3-day military exercise and drills in the Persian Gulf waters in southern Iran to exercise rapid deployment of its forces in case of a crisis. Moving right along, we see this was a piece just released on the 22nd of January 2013, again highlighting Russia's involvement in all of this and how they're standing in solidarity with the nations that are opposed to NATO and the Western-backed agenda over there. So we see this conflict of epic proportions slowly progressing towards a climax that could result in, basically Armageddon. And we see this is from a Chinese news agency called the Xinhua News Agency, and it states that Iran and Russia signed an agreement to coordinate their security. And it mentions here that Iran and Russia signed a memorandum of understanding here on Tuesday to increase security cooperation between the two countries. Iranian Interior Minister Mustafa Mohammad Nayar and visiting Russian Minister of Internal Affairs Vladimir Alexandrovich Kolokotsev signed the MOU during a meeting in Tehran on Tuesday. And I probably butchered those names, so forgive me. But again, this is very symbolic of yet more of the nations coming together in unity that will be opposed to Israel in the Battle of Gog and Magog. That the Scripture tells us about. And another piece here from the Debka file talking about how Russia has airlifted their nationals out of Syria and evacuated them, and Moscow and Iran actually armed Bashar al-Assad for a major armored push. And as it says here, the Russian Emergency Ministry said Monday, and this was on January the 21st, that it is sending 2 planes to Beirut to evacuate 100 Russians from Syria. The first such effort since the uprising against Bashar Assad began in March of 2011. Moscow also announced contingency plans to lift 30,000 Russian nationals from the embattled country. This evacuation of Russian nationals starting Tuesday was decided after the Syrian High Command received orders from the President Assad to organize mobile armored strike groups with massive firepower for a big push to run the rebel forces out of the towns, villages, and areas they have captured, mostly in the north and southeast. So we see again, Russia cooperating with Iran and, basically being involved in the Syrian conflict. And this is only going to escalate from here, right? We know that if we believe in the Word of God, we don't know when or how, but we know that eventually this will escalate at some point in time, maybe in years, maybe in months. I mean, who knows? I don't claim to know, but I know that all these events that are taking place are basically incremental steps towards the, literal fulfillment of these biblical prophecies of the Battle of Gog and Magog and Armageddon and, Isaiah 17 and the prophecy on the destruction of Damascus and the Isaiah 19 prophecies on Egypt and so forth. We can go on, and this is what we see. We talked about Daniel 11:41 through 45 and the Antichrist power sweeping through the Middle East, toppling many regimes and putting, people into power that will carry out this evil agenda. But I'm not blaming one side for any of this, because war in general is nothing but the devil, right? We got nations against nations, and they don't even realize that this is spiritual warfare, and they're all deceived into thinking that they got to go to war and drop bombs on each other, when really they just need to overcome the spiritual battles within and become good people and just do what's right. And and we know that humans are incapable of doing this, seemingly, and people often like to say, "Oh, well, look, there is no God. He wouldn't allow all these wars." Well, He's coming back and He's going to restore everything, and He's given everybody the God-given gift of free will to make their own choices. And I'll tell people this: don't blame God for man's sinful ways that have the planet in the state it's in right now, because it's not because of God. It's because of us and our choices and our fallen nature, and the fact that sin is inherent in our nature now because of the culture we live in, the global society that we've created, and that stems way back from the Garden of Eden, when we had sin inherent in our nature. And that was the whole purpose of Christ coming, to provide a gateway for people to become part of the body of Christ and gain eternal everlasting life, so that on Judgment Day you stand in front of God as part of the body of Christ and covered by the blood of Christ, so you're not being judged for your sinful life, but for the only perfect life there ever was, the holy life of Jesus Christ, the divine Son of God. But I mean, we know that Russia's involved in this. If you study the scriptures, and we know that Bible prophecy basically states that the Battle of Gog and Magog, spoken of in the book of Ezekiel, does refer to a northern European military power, basically headed up by Russia. They will basically come in and invade Palestine and be against Israel in the Battle of Gog and Magog, and we see that the prophecy of the Russian invasion of Palestine is located in Ezekiel right after the prediction of the revival of Israel as a nation, and it seems pretty evident that Russia will invade Palestine in the near future as they become more and more involved here. Perhaps during the tribulation period, and again, it's just more proof that the Word of God holds true, and that how many more prophecies have to come to literal fulfillment for people to understand this? But again, we just see these tensions rising and the saber rattling continuing as tensions rise and we move ever so closer to a conflict of epic proportions between all the major nations of the world, with Israel being in the center of it. And the makings of the Battle of Gog and Magog are being formulated right before our very eyes here. And, speaking more of Russia here, we had seen, if you remember, I had reported on this, that we had a Canadian naval officer that actually was selling secrets to the Russians, military secrets and so forth. And here we see another article more recently from the 31st of January 2013 talking about how this spying damage is still ongoing, according to the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service officials. And he basically was selling all the military secrets of Canada to the Russians, because we know that Canada will stand with the United States and Israel and NATO and be opposed to all the other nations like Russia, China, Iran, Syria, Egypt, and all these other nations that will be involved in this major conflict as time progresses and as tensions continue to escalate and the saber rattling continues. And also recently we had seen, this was reported back on Friday, January the 25th, that the U.S. came out and ended their civil society dialogue with Russia. And this was according to the Associated Press. And we see here that the Obama administration has pulled out of a civil society dialogue with Russia to protest the Kremlin's crackdown on dissent and new laws against non-governmental organizations. The civil society talks are among several initiated by President Barack Obama and then Russian President Dmitry Medvedev to reset strained U.S.-Russian relations. And it says here, State Department spokeswoman Victoria Nuland says, in light of Russia's civil society restrictions, the talks are no longer useful or appropriate. And it says here, despite the reset, human rights and democracy disagreements continue to cause tensions. That little thing, I wish I could get this out of here, but anyways, continue to cause tensions between Washington and Moscow. The old Cold War foes are also at odds over Syria and missile defense, and we had alluded to that earlier in the video as well. Also, just a few days ago, on the 30th of January, we had seen Russia announce that they, in fact, terminated a decade-old deal with the United States in the spheres of law and drug enforcement. So we see slowly all these things being withdrawn from by Russia and the U.S. as the tensions rise over many things, specifically what's going on in the Middle East and Syria and so forth. And all these things are part of the incremental steps that are to be taken and the incremental events that need to take place as we progress toward the fulfillment of the prophecies of the Battle of Gog and Magog and what have you. And it talks about, the first sentence in the piece says, scrapping of the pact comes amid the deteriorating ties between Moscow and Washington over several issues. And then it goes on to talk about some of these issues, but we all know what those issues are, and we all know what the grand outcome of all this is, especially if you've been studying your Bible and the Scriptures and what the prophecies tell us about these times in which we live. Meanwhile, Russia still being vocal, Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev has come out and said that he sees no flexibility in the ongoing dispute between Russia and the West over the planned deployment of a U.S.-led NATO missile defense system in Europe. And I had shown you guys a lot on this in the past, and Russia had come out and stated publicly that they reserve their right for a preemptive strike on this NATO or U.S.-led NATO missile system in Europe if they go ahead with it. And, it's just another sign of the deteriorating relations between these two nations. And, in fact, here on navaltoday.com, the Navy's website, we see that the Russian Navy is actually to conduct artillery shooting drills near the Syrian coast. And if we read a little bit into it here without getting into the entirety of the piece, we'll see that it states warships of Black Sea, Baltic, and Northern fleets started conducting a training mission during large interfleet exercises of the Russian Navy, as reported by Press Relations and Information Services of Russian Ministry of Defense. artillery shooting practice will take place near the Syrian coast, where the civil war still lasts. And that's what we have seen in the past few months and the last year, especially. The U.S. sending warships over there, doing drills. We had seen, many other nations as well being involved in these drills. Some of the largest drills in history, in fact, is what we have seen. And so this continues here. And in other news, on the 31st, it was reported that the United States Vice President Joe Biden was expected to hold talks with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and the Syrian opposition chief on Saturday about a transitional government in Syria. But then today, on the 2nd of February, Russia came out and basically rejected and denied the Western media reports claiming that Moscow was planning to hold talks with the Syrian opposition on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference about a political transition for Syria. So, conflicting reports there, but then we see this piece released by the Haaretz news agency that the Syria opposition chief actually met with Russia's Lavrov in Munich. This was reported today by Reuters originally, and the DPA, and states that Moaz al-Khatib, the president of the Syrian National Coalition, says he received a clear invitation from the foreign minister to visit Moscow. Al-Khatib also meant to meet with Joe Biden and Lakhdar Brahimi. So we'll see what comes of this, but definitely some conflicting reports there. According to the speaker of the in the Iranian Majlis, or parliament, Ali Lariani has stated that NATO forces are stirring up sectarian division in Iraq and Afghanistan instead of helping to restore calm to the war-torn countries. He's quoted as saying, "The presence of NATO forces in Iraq and Afghanistan has resulted in the intensification of domestic problems and emergence of sectarian strife and discrepancy in these countries." And that was a quote from Lariani. And he says here, NATO has never cared about the interests of these Islamic countries. And he goes on to state many other statements. But again, that's another good example of this powder keg that's brewing there in the Middle East with this instability, not only in Syria and other areas, but also still going on in Iraq and Afghanistan. Meanwhile, the United States and Afghanistan have actually set plans to negotiate over a new deal under which American forces could be immune from prosecution in Afghan courts, which basically gives them free rein, right? They can go and do anything and they can't be tried in the courts over there. But yet again, I want to reiterate the fact that some of these Islamic republics of Central Asia are actually part of the Battle of Gog and Magog, with Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Pakistan. And we hear a lot about Turkey as well, and Turkey obviously is currently part of NATO, but they will switch sides and join the other side of the Battle of Gog and Magog against Israel, just like the book of Ezekiel states. And it's again very symbolic of these biblical times that we find ourselves living in here, folks. And speaking of Afghanistan, according to the German parliament, they've extended the German presence of the German military forces in Afghanistan for another 13 months. And this was released yesterday on Friday, February 1st, 2013. So we see that, there's many nations involved in this. We know the UK's on the ground over there. We know many nations are on the ground in several of these areas. Even in Mali right now, we look at the situation over there, which we're going to do an in-depth update on coming up later. But we know that the UK's on the ground in Mali. Germans are on the ground over there. Obviously, the French are, because they're the ones leading this over there. The U.S. is on the ground over there. Destabilization across the globe right now is rampant. And we talk about the territorial disputes in the Arctic. What about the territorial disputes between Britain and Argentina over the Malvinas or Falkland Islands region? We talk about the South China Sea and the Asia Pacific with Taiwan and China, the U.S., Japan, the Koreas, and all these other island nations along the Western Pacific there that are involved. It's again, my friends, we're living in very prophetic times, and I think that it's important for people to start developing their relationship with God now, because we may be short on time. Who knows? We may have 100 years, but we may have just a few years left. And I personally believe that if I live out my entire lifespan, if I live to be 50, 60 years old, that I'm going to see these things come to pass. I believe we are the generation of Revelation. And we see here in this piece from the Debka file talking about the fact that Egypt and Syria are falling apart, and we're going to talk a lot more about Egypt towards the end of the video, and the instability that's running wild over there, and just again, it seems to be literal fulfillment of the Isaiah 19 prophecy of Egypt. And excuse me, this piece talks about how this could be an Israeli nightmare as these things spill over the borders, and this destabilization, basically gets brought to Israel. And all these events going on, my friends, are all leading up to this conflict of epic proportions of all the major nations of the world, with Israel at the center of it all, which is basically setting up the battle of Gog and Magog in Armageddon. And speaking of Egypt, we see that Egypt's President Mohammed Morsi has said that his Jewish slurs were misunderstood. And he says he's not against the Jewish faith, but his comments in the 2010 video, he called Jews descendants of apes and pigs. And I mean, how could that be taken out of context? It's no, it's just taken out of context. I meant nice apes and nice pigs. Like, you gotta be careful what you say. But again, I'll link you guys up to it. But it's just very symbolic of the rhetoric that's so rampant in the midst of all of this turmoil. Now, we talked a little bit about Turkey, and we're going to see more on Turkey as we move along here. And this is a piece from globalresearch.ca talking about how the Turkish people were taking action against the deployment of Patriot missiles against Syria, in which NATO was installing there. And we know that they've been intervening in Syria for some time now, and basically creating the destabilization over there to justify the toppling of the Assad government, and this is just more of the same here, and it's basically par for the course over there with everything we've seen. And I'm not promoting it and saying it's okay, but this is just what we've seen over there, and it's disgusting, and it's terrible. It's terrible atrocities by both sides of the coin, not just NATO, by everybody involved here, and so this is just more examples here of the Turkish people rebelling against NATO. And we know that Turkey is part of NATO right now, but just like the scriptures tell us, that they're going to switch sides and join the battle of Gog and Magog against Israel. We'll throw in a link to another piece here talking about the Turks rallying against this NATO missile deployment near the Syrian border. More examples here of how the conflicts are spilling over the borders, as this piece alludes to the fact that an Iranian and Hezbollah convoy was blown up on the Syrian Golan, as these border tensions are shooting up, and this is what we had seen. We had seen the attacks even in Lebanon, so we're seeing this destabilization spill over into the neighboring nations now, as this conflict between many nations escalates further and further. In another piece here, this is alluding to how an Iron Dome missile defense system was posted and activated up in northern Israel. And it states here that Tehran is looking seriously at a limited Syrian-Lebanese clash of arms with Israel, possibly using Bashar al-Assad's chemical weapons as a trigger. And it goes on to say that the deployment of an Iron Dome anti-missile battery some days ago to reinforce security in northern Israel in the key Haifa port. The Iranians see three strategic benefits in embroiling Israel in a limited war with its two allies, Syria and Hezbollah. And it gives you some of these issues there, but again, we see the Iron Dome missile defense systems deployed in northern Israel in the midst of all this conflict. Also, a pair of German Patriot missiles or missile batteries have been stationed in Turkey, and they've now become operational. This was reported on January 29th, and this was actually following the activation of two Dutch batteries near the country's south. So we're seeing all these missile defense systems being set up. These are all the preparations for war, people. I mean, we haven't seen actions like this since what, World War II? And even then, it probably wasn't to this extent. And, we're told that tribulation is going to come that will be far worse than the world has ever seen, even since there was a nation. And, we're looking at all the earth changes and the animal die-offs and the plagues and pestilences and the wars and all these things taking place. And I mean, it's not hard to see when you develop an understanding of what the divinely inspired Word of God has told us and warned us about. And as these times draw near, we're getting, closer and closer to, times getting really tough. And if you can't develop a relationship and accept and understand the importance of God in your life and the gateway that's provided there, while it's relatively easy now, what's going to happen when all this tribulation breaks out? It's going to be even that much harder. And it tells us that, and because of lawlessness will abound, that many would grow cold, and we're seeing that all these prophetic implications being carried out and slowly progressing towards fulfillment. And this is why it's important for people to understand that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. And you can gain that eternal everlasting life through Him and through the gateway He provided. Meanwhile, over here on the Jerusalem Post, we see that Israel is on high alert over the Syrian weapons of mass destruction, or the WMDs. And we know they've been worried about chemical weapons for some time now. Now, is that a made-up thing, just like they did with Iraq or Afghanistan when they said they had to go get the weapons of mass destruction and never found any? But it states here that Israel is following the possibility of the transfer of Syria's chemical weapons to radical elements, as its neighbor to the north appears to be gradually approaching a final meltdown. With dozens of storage and production sites for chemical weapons spread out across Syria, any foreign involvement would require extensive planning, intelligence, and resources to succeed. And it goes on to talk more about the endeavors that they plan on taking. But again, they're touting this and pumping this up in the media about this chemical weapons threat, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in some other articles I'm going to show you as we move along here towards the close. And this is what we're seeing: many Syrians trying to flee to the neighboring countries now, and apparently, according to the United Nations Refugee Agency, they're saying that more than 700,000 Syrians have fled to neighboring countries as violence fueled by these foreign-backed militants continues to threaten civilian lives in the area. As I said, Turkey is part of NATO now, and this is a piece talking about how that they're triggering this destabilization and political chaos because we know what they do, right? What's one of their problem, reaction, solution? That's what they're saying. An order out of chaos, create the chaos to get the reaction that allows them to implement the solution which carries out their agenda. And, we talked a lot about that in the past. And this is what we see here: U.S. and NATO to destabilize Iraq through Qatar and Turkey. Now, we know Turkey will eventually switch sides, as the scriptures tell us, and join the battle of Gog and Magog against Israel. But we also know, and this is something else we've covered, that Saudi Arabia and Qatar are actually some of the Arab allies to the Western-backed agenda over there in these regions, and that's what we see. We see Saudi Arabia and Qatar, aiding the agenda of the Western powers over there, and this talks a little bit about that. And again, I was talking about the chemical weapons threat that they're touting in the media. And this is a piece reported by Press TV talking about how the UK and Qatari plot against Syria has been revealed, according to leaked documents from a UK-based defense contractor. They've revealed, apparently, that a Qatari proposal to the firm has been made to counterfeit a plan to claim that Syria has given the go-ahead for the use of chemical weapons in the country, which would, allow them to put that all in the media and justify, oh, we got to go and stop them to using chemical weapons, and, go on what they will disguise as a humanitarian military endeavor, which is actually, not the case. They disguise, they put the veil of humanitarian efforts over their military forced regime changes quite often, as myself and many have reported time and time again, and many have reported way before I was ever even doing this. This is no secret. We know the media and how biased they are, and but again, so we'll see what happens. But we do see this chemical weapons idea being thrown around and tossed around, and the weapons of mass destruction that they have to go and get again. It's the same thing they used in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's just how they destabilize each region and topple the regimes and slowly progress, as the ultimate endgame will end up being the Battle of Gog and Magog, as all these nations end up surrounding Israel, right? And that's what we're seeing. Meanwhile, the so-called Syrian National Coalition has called for more arms from foreign countries to continue its deadly war against the Syrian government and its people. And that's what we had been seeing. The Western powers actually funding the opposition groups over there, giving them, Stinger ray missiles. We had reported on that before. Cash infusions, communications gear. This isn't... if they want to go in there and really do humanitarian efforts, stop the fighting. Don't arm the opposition groups to continue to war against the government. Usually, anyone with a third of a brain can understand that this isn't the way to go about it. But yet, that's what they're doing. And again, it's very symbolic of the times in which we live. And as I stated earlier, Saudi Arabia is one of the Arab allies of the West, so they're always going to be siding with the agenda of the Western-backed forces over there. And this is what we see here in this piece, which was released on January 26th, 2013. Excuse me. And it states that a senior member of Saudi Arabia's monarchy has called for militants fighting against the Syrian government to be given sophisticated weapons, including anti-aircraft weapons. So see, they're calling to arm the opposition groups over there as well. And, again, if you want to stop the war, don't arm people with more and more sophisticated weaponry when the government's got the same. You stop the fighting, sit down, and you talk about it. And grown adults come to an agreement where each side sacrifice what needs to be had equally for the betterment of humanity as a whole. But we know that, evidently, these people aren't capable of that, because they're just so deceived, and they aren't doing what's right by God and what's just right in general. And I guess this is what happens when you don't truly have God working in you and working in your life. You're going to fall into these toxic behaviors and desires of the flesh, like greed, and that's what a lot of this just stems from, is greed and power and ultimately deception. The scriptures tell us Satan deceives the whole world. We're battling against not against the flesh, but we're battling against the spiritual warfare and the principalities of darkness in the heavenly realms. And we'll go on and on. You can just look at the article I did on spiritual warfare. It's very extensive, and we include all the scriptures in there that talk about this. And it's just, that's why it's so important to understand that it's not nation against nation here. These people need to stop dropping bombs on one another, but we know that it won't stop, because the scriptures even tell us that. And it will seem to stop for a while once they implement their world government and they sign the 7-year peace treaty. But we know that 3 years into the treaty, just like the Word of God tells us, that this treaty will be broken and chaos will ensue once again. Because what happens when you give the power of the whole world unto a small group of people, and ultimately one person, which will be the Antichrist figure heading this beast system spoken of in the book of Revelation that arises in the third, basically the third world Babylonian Empire, which will fall again, because in the end we know that God wins the battle and good triumphs over evil always. And that's why it's so important for people to make the choice to not side with evil and Satan and side with good and God. And regardless of what happens in this small existence that we live now, which is nothing but a feather in the wind, we can have eternity, eternal life in a restored new earth, a new heavenly sanctuary that will be perfect, just the way God had originally intended it before, the serpent or Satan corrupted the human nature with sin and these lustful desires. And so that's why it's so important to accept God and make the choice between good and evil. It's really that simple. Choose between good and evil and live your life that way. And learn the Word of God, develop your relationship with God, and get saved, people, because there's only one gateway, and it's through what Jesus Christ did for us with his sacrifice on Calvary, period. Moving on, we've got this piece from the Times of Israel talking about how a top official was sent to Moscow over the Syrian chemical weapons worries, as the NSC chief Yakov Amador was dispatched in an effort to secure Russia's assurance that Syria's stockpiles wouldn't fall into the wrong hands. So again, we see them touting this chemical weapons scare, and the fact that they might have to go in there with their military humanitarian efforts, and which are obviously not humanitarian efforts, and ultimately these governments aren't going to use these chemical weapons on their own people, because that's their government over there, that's their society, that's even if they are dictators, they still want their society to function, and even if they want them all to be slaves, they still want functional slaves to carry out their desires. They're not going to kill them all. I'm not saying genocide hasn't happened. It has happened many times, and it will happen again, and that's just what we're progressing towards, is a global genocide of God's people, because that's what we're involved in here, people. It's God versus Satan, good versus evil, and this is manifesting in the flesh today, and it's slowly progressing towards the extermination of that. And once the New World Order and one world government, Antichrist beast kingdom arises and is put into power, those who don't approve of it or worship the beast in his image will be eliminated. And this is exactly what the scriptures tell us. And as reported by Reuters, we see that Lebanon has reported a heavy presence of Israeli jets in their airspace. And as we see here, it states that Lebanon said on Wednesday that Israeli jets had flown over its territory overnight, part of an apparently increased air activity, which comes as Israel has expressed concern about weapons in neighboring Syria falling out of government control. And then, of course, just a few days ago, we had seen that the Syrian army came out and stated that an Israeli airstrike at dawn on Wednesday targeted a military research center in Jamraya near Damascus, after several media reports said Israeli warplanes bombed a weapons convoy near the border of Lebanon. And so that's what we see. This was reported by the Associated Press, as it talks about the Israeli jets bombing the military target in Syria. So now we see that, Israel is literally directly involved now, according to these reports. And again, my friends, it's just more of the incremental steps towards the fulfillment of biblical prophecy here. With all the nations surrounding, the Middle East, and all this conflict spreading all around, and the chaos, and the nations circling, and all the major nations of the world entangled into a massive conflict, with who at the center but Israel and Jerusalem. And as reported here on the Jerusalem Post, we see that according to the Israeli officials, they're not going to compromise on security measures. As it says here, Shalom and Ayalon take to the airwaves as reports emerge on an IAF strike on a target in Syria close to the Lebanon border. And this talks about that they're not going to budge on that if they feel threatened. So we just see more and more escalation here. And in regards to this Israeli airstrike on the Syrian border, or the Syria-Lebanon border, we see that the target was actually a truckload of weapons going from Syria to Lebanon. Says a diplomat, the source of this information in this piece on the Jerusalem Post. And he added that the cache was likely not chemical weapons. More reports here. This one's from the Times of Israel, saying that the Israeli jets hit Hezbollah-bound anti-aircraft missiles in that airstrike that took place. Meanwhile, NATO has apparently intensified their missile buildup on the Syrian border as 2 Patriot complexes were put on combat duty in Turkey. Apparently 2 NATO surface-to-air missile complexes have been put on combat duty not far from the Syrian border, according to reports from sources in Reuters that came across the wire on Tuesday, citing German sources. These 2 complexes, which were delivered from Germany, have been deployed near the Turkish city of Kahramanmaraş. In total, NATO has sent 6 Patriot complexes to Turkey, 2 from the U.S., 2 from Germany, and 2 from the Netherlands. And we had seen that reiterated in previous reports that I had shown you in the video here. More comments from the Iranian Foreign Minister Ali Akbar Saleh, as he stated once again that foreign-backed mercenaries are spreading the chaos in Syria. And in his comments, he has stated, and I'll just read one briefly here for you. He says, and I quote, "It is clear to everyone that those committing atrocities in Syria are mercenaries who have come from outside Syria and have been armed and are fighting against the Syrian government." And he does allude to the fact that these are backed by the Western forces and their Arab allies to create destabilization and chaos in the region, to topple the government and get one of their puppet dictators into power, as they have often done, and we've seen that act in many other areas like Egypt, Yemen, Libya, and so forth, right? Tunisia, and the list goes on. And then we just see more of these Western nations backing this destabilization agenda over there in Syria, as we see here in this piece from cbcnews.ca, talking about how the International Cooperation Minister Julian Fantino announced Wednesday that Canada will more than double its aid to the victims of violence in Syria. And it's important to understand that this money goes to the Syrian opposition groups, because they're saying that they're the victims here of the government's repressive or oppressive actions, if you will, when really this money's going to the opposition groups and funding their war against the government, right? It's just another way to disguise it as humanitarian efforts. But it states here that Fantino pledged an extra $25 million, bringing Canada's total contribution to more than $48 million in all. And another piece here in which the White House came out and publicly warned Syria not to transfer weapons to Hezbollah in the neighboring Lebanon. And with even more indications here and signs of the escalation of tensions between, Iran and the United States, we see that a senior military commander has stated that Iran's Islamic Revolution Guard Corps will file a lawsuit against the United States for its continued violation of Iranian airspace with remote-controlled drones. Back on the Times of Israel now, and this piece here talks more about Syria, as we see here. According to a former national security advisor, he's warned that the Syria situation could escalate, and it says here that Giora Island posits symbolic Syrian missile launches that could aggravate a tense situation with Israel. Well, no kidding, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this escalate further and further. Meanwhile, Syria and Iran have threatened retaliation against Israel because of the airstrike carried out, or the alleged airstrike carried out by the Israeli warplanes on the Lebanese and Syria border that I had previously talked about in the video here. And it says that Syria is threatening to retaliate for an Israeli airstrike, and its ally Iran says there will be repercussions for the Jewish state over the attack. On Thursday, Syria sent a letter to United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon stressing the country's right to defend itself, its territory, and its sovereignty, and holding Israel and its supporters accountable. And again, we see Russia voicing their opinion as they've come out and said, and as we see here in the title, they've slammed the Israeli attack on Syria, and the United States forces in Jordan have been put on alert, according to this piece here. And it says that the Syrian announcement of an Israeli airstrike on a military site near Damascus Wednesday, January 30th, drew strong condemnation from Moscow the next day. Such action, if confirmed, would amount to unacceptable military interference in the war-ravaged country, said the statement issued by Russian Foreign Ministry on Thursday. If this information is confirmed, then we are dealing with unprovoked attacks on targets on the territory of a sovereign country which blatantly violate the United Nations Charter, and is unacceptable, no matter the moves or the motives to justify it. And so, again, we see Russia voicing their opinion opposed to the actions of Israel, and again it lines up with biblical prophecy, as Russia is one of the nations heading up this invasion and this battle of Gog and Magog against Israel. And we see this coming to pass right before our very eyes, my friends. And, to no surprise here, the Lebanese resistance movement, Hezbollah, has condemned the Israeli regime's aerial assault as well, that targeted a research center near the Syrian capital. And according to Syria's state television, they're saying that the Israeli regime is actually deploying military forces along the Syrian border. So we'll see, what comes to this after those Israeli airstrikes potentially targeted the research facility over there on the border as well. Now Syria State TV is saying that the Israeli regime is deploying forces over there. And again, that's from Syrian state TV, so take it with a grain of salt, I would say, but again, very symbolic of the escalation of tensions over there in the region. In fact, Syria has actually summoned the commander of the United Nations peacekeeping mission in the Golan Heights area over the Israeli attack on the Defense Research Center in Damascus that was struck. Meanwhile, talking about the UN, we see that the United Nations has also called on the Israeli regime to halt all its illegal settlement activities in the occupied West Bank and withdraw the settlers from the Palestinian land. And as we see here in a quote, it says, Israel must, in compliance with Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, cease all settlement activities without preconditions, a report by the United Nations Human Rights Inquiry said on Thursday. And from the France press agency, we had seen that Palestinians were actually being evicted from the West Bank, and they've been, protesting and so forth. So that's another situation, showing that this destabilization is spilling all over Israel as well. And again, very symbolic of the powder keg potential of this explosive situation that's engulfing the entire Middle East right now. Iran reiterating their threats again, as they've threatened grave consequences for Israel after the Syrian strike by Israel. As it says here, Damascus says attacks will not go unanswered as Tehran joins Russia and the Arab world in condemning reported Israeli attack on the weapons convoy or research site. And again, you see that Russia's mentioned in allegiance with these nations because they will head up this battle of Gog and Magog, as the book of Ezekiel points out. Moving on to this piece from the Jerusalem Post, we see that U.S. Vice President has urged Tehran to hold direct talks with the U.S. over their nuclear program, and he added that Iran has the burden of proof over its behavior, and he also stated that, time for diplomacy is not unlimited. So they don't have unlimited time. He's basically saying in the political terms that time is running out for them to make a decision. Again, we see the potential for a catastrophic climax here if they go ahead and start striking the Iranian nuclear facilities. We know that draws in China and Russia, which are already involved anyways. And there's just so much going on around the globe right now, my friends. It's This is why the Watchman's got to show you guys all this, so you can understand the times in which you live, because you're not going to see a lot of this stuff all over your TV, and if you do, you see it for a minute and 10 seconds, and then they'll talk for 10 minutes about which celebrity's on the most drugs or who they're dating, and you know, and then you'll go and you'll watch American Idol and all these other shows that just poison your mind and dumb you down and keep you ignorant to the truths and realities that surround you in your society in which you live. And as we see here on navaltoday.com, we have Iran beginning their naval war games in the Persian Gulf, and as it states, the Islamic Revolution Guard Corps launched on Wednesday a 3-day naval war games exercise codenamed Fath 91 in the Persian Gulf, according to Fars news agency. And it states that during the war games they will exercise different tactics of naval defense to prepare for potential chaos or defense in the region. And here we see in this piece that's up here on Reuters news agency that China and Russia and the U.S. raise Mediterranean naval focus. As we see here, Egypt has seen no shortage of empires come and go, from its own ancient civilizations to those of Greece, Rome, Britain, and France. Now it's among the outposts of the latest Mediterranean power, China. And we know that China, Russia, and the U.S. are all in the Mediterranean Sea region. And we know that even in the Red Sea and in the Persian Gulf, there's warships and war games going on and defense exercises and missile defense systems being deployed all over by nations, and even NATO all over the Middle East and Europe. And my friends, if you don't think the preparation for large-scale war is being had right now, you need to really have a look at things for yourself. And that's why I post the links to everything I show you, not to show you that the world's going to end or anything like that, but to show you that time's running short and you need to invite God into your life. Speaking of the Mediterranean, we see the Portsmouth-based Royal Navy mine hunter HMS Catastock has sailed on Monday, and it will be embarking on a 4-month NATO mission in the Mediterranean, as we see here. So yet more ships going on down there, and it says here that ships from allied nations work together throughout the year, defending sea routes from the threat of underwater mines and carrying out joint training exercises. And it goes on to talk a little bit more about that, but yet we see more warships and war games being had down in the Mediterranean. And we see more exercises here, and this involving the Russian Navy's interfleet exercises as they've drawn to a conclusion. And we see that it was the largest interfleet training exercises within the last 10 years of the Russian Navy, with the participation of Baltic, Northern, Black Sea, and Pacific fleets in the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea. And they're nearing completion, as reported by a representative of the Black Sea Fleet, Captain of the First Rank, Vyacheslav Truchiev. And so even Russia is holding some of their largest in the last decade exercises with multiple fleets there in the Mediterranean. In another piece here, which is very symbolic of the escalating tensions in the region, we see that an Iranian official has came out and stated that Damascus is at the forefront of the anti-Israel resistance campaign, and the Muslim world will not allow Israel to march on Syrian soil. This piece is from globalresearch.ca, talking about Israel's bombing of Syria and how it escalates the threat of wider war. And that's exactly what we see here, my friends. And honestly, it's like I've been saying for the last 2 years. Syria and Iran are the last two dominoes to fall before the entire world is thrust into this global conflict between all the major nations of the world in this battle of epic proportions and prophetic biblical implications, because we know that once this happens, NATO's involved, all of NATO, okay? And why don't you go take a look at all the nations involved in NATO? And once NATO's involved, we know that the potential to topple Syria will happen. Iran will be involved because they're going to protect Syria, and we know that Russia and China both stand up for Syria and Iran. Russia will be involved as soon as the Syrian conflict gets out of hand. They've stated that publicly and are already at odds with the Western powers, specifically the United States, and are opposed to a lot of the NATO missile defense systems that are being implemented in Europe and so forth, right? And China has already come out and stated that any attack on Iran would be considered a direct attack on Beijing, and they're already at odds with the United States as well, with the South China Sea disputes and so forth, right? So you can see the trickle-down effect and the domino effect that will take place once the dominoes of Syria and Iran fall. More condemnation on the alleged Israeli airstrikes on Syria, as Lebanese President Michel Sleiman has denounced the Israeli attack on a research center in Syria, accusing the Tel Aviv regime of using the turmoil in the Arab country to carry out its aggressive policies. Meanwhile, of course, British Foreign Secretary William Hague claims that the Israeli regime's violation of Syria's airspace in the air raid on a Syrian army research center is a reaction to the Syrian crisis rather than a breach of the country's sovereignty, and he thinks it's justified, but of course, because he's an ally with Israel, right? And so we see that the nation's starting to take sides, the tensions continue to escalate, the saber rattling continues. Israel's directly involved now, if they weren't already before, right? Again, my friends, it's again very, very symbolic of what the scripture tells us would happen in these times. And I could see this being the reason why Russia was so opposed to this attack, because according to this piece here from the Times of Israel, that Iranian and Russian experts are habitually present at this facility that was struck by Israel, allegedly, and so maybe they were worried that some of their people could have been there, right? And we know that Russia and Iran, I just showed you earlier in the video, they're signing new security agreements to cooperate with one another, and again, my friends, it's just another sign that the prophecies of Russia being involved in heading up this battle against Israel, which will be the battle of Gog and Magog, is starting to literally be fulfilled incrementally here with the steps that we are watching occur. Meanwhile, apparently at least 2 Lebanese soldiers were killed in the clashes with militants fighting against the Syrian government in eastern Lebanon near the border with Syria. Another sign that this conflict is spilling over the borders. Also, another good indication here of what the scriptures tell us in regards to Turkey switching sides, even though they're part of NATO now, switching sides and joining the other side of the battle of Gog and Magog against Israel. And we see that here as a senior Iranian lawmaker says cooperation between Tehran and Ankara plays a major role in promoting peace and security and resolving crisis in the Middle East. And so we see the Iran reaching their hand out to Turkey, and we know that they will not accept right away, but eventually they will be on the side with Iran and Russia and China and the rest of the nations that are against Israel in the battle of Gog and Magog. Meanwhile, the Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, Sayed Jalili, says the Islamic Republic will help Syria to stand against plots by global arrogance. Now, earlier in the report, I had talked about the developments in regards to Iran's military capabilities, and we see here the Iranian Defense Minister Ahmad Vahidi has came out and stated that Iran's new domestically designed and developed fighter jet, the Qaher 313 or the Conqueror 313, is super advanced, like that of U.S. Fighter jets, and capable of evading radars. And speaking of NATO and the deployment of all their new missile defense systems and so forth, we see that Germany and Italy have came out and said that they expect the United States to fulfill their obligation after Congress axed funding for a missile defense program financed by the 3 countries. More signs here of Turkey potentially joining the other side, as the scriptures tell us, with the Turkish foreign minister slamming Israel for the alleged Syria strikes. And Davutoglu has accused Assad of inaction after an IAF strike, suggesting failure to respond is due to secret agreement with Israel. And that's one thing that is a pretty serious accusation there by the Turkish foreign minister. And so we'll see that eventually Turkey will switch sides, because the Word of God always proves true, and we'll see them go, even though they're NATO now, that they will not be and will in fact turn against Israel in the future. According to the defense minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, he's came out and said that we're following the Syrian WMD issue closely, as the title of this Jerusalem Post article reads, and it says that Time magazine says the U.S. gave Israel the green light for more attacks. As the defense minister says, there's a possibility of weapons transfer to Hezbollah following the inevitable fall of Assad, and he refuses to address the reported IAF strike. And this last piece I want to finish off this update with is talking more about China voicing their opinion, as China has reiterated their calls for a political solution to the ongoing crisis in Syria, supporting the mediation efforts by the United Nations and Arab League Joint Special Envoy for Syria and the Lakhdar Brahimi. We know that the first one, Kofi Annan, didn't work. And this is just another way for them to say, look, we tried with all these peace agreements and it didn't work. Now we have to use military force. Now, we're going to go in with humanitarian intervention, right? And then we know where it's going to go from there. Yes, I mean, the Word of God tells us exactly. But in a quote here, it says that China is willing to keep close communication with all parties so as to settle the crisis impartially, peacefully, and properly, according to Hong Lei, a spokesman for China's foreign ministry, as he told a press briefing in Beijing today, Saturday, February 2nd. So, again, China is being more and more involved, as they don't want this to happen, because, they will ultimately, that draws them into conflict as well. And again, my friends, I've been talking about it for some time. All the prophecies, we talked about Isaiah 17 and the destruction of Damascus, which appears to be, in the process of potential fulfillment if things continue to escalate at the rate in which they are. We talked about Isaiah 19 and the prophecies in Egypt. Daniel 11, 41 through 45, talking about, all the Antichrist spirits sweeping through the Middle East, and it mentions the exact nations. So I'm going to finish off here, my friends. All the links to everything I showed you will be in the description box below, as usual, so if you want to check them out and verify them for yourself. But we'll continue to watch these situations over there and around the world, and provide you with updates as these events unfold globally, specifically in the Middle East. Yeah, so that's all I got for you guys in this particular update. Sorry it was rather long. I just wanted to kind of review some of the things that I had been talking about before and give you guys a good idea of what's going on over there and around the world, for that matter. But so that's all I got, guys. Much love, and God bless each and every one of you.